Chapter 2, Matthew chapter 2. We're going to read together. I don't normally start out most of my sermons by reading the text, but I feel like today is probably one of those days where I should. So now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Judea, the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Verse 2, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Verse 7. And then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the young child. When you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. Verse 9. When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. This is one of the great stories of Christmas, no doubt. If you've been around church for very long, you've been part of a Sunday school program or anything like that, you've heard of the wise men from the east. And wherever the story of the birth of Jesus is told, this story of strange men from some faraway land bringing gifts to baby Jesus is told as well. And the story comes to us, and it's only in Matthew's gospel. It's not found anywhere else, only this portion of the gospel, Matthew's gospel. And all that we know about these wise men we find in this one chapter, chapter 2. And they show up in verse 1, and they only play what seems like a small or minor role, even though they're the center of the story in a sense from verse 1 to verse 12. But as soon as verse 12 happens, they leave us, they disappear. But not only do they leave us, but they leave us with many unanswered questions. Who are the wise men? Who were they? Where did they come from? How many were there? We often assume, because we hear it, that there were 3. How many of us have been taught that or believe that based on depictions? But we don't have a specific number. So how many were there? What is the star they saw, and how did it lead them to Bethlehem? How long after the birth of Jesus did they arrive in Jerusalem? Because as it's told, there's seems to be no way that they could have come right when he was born. After all, they didn't meet him in a manger, they met him in a house. So how long? How old was Jesus when they came? How did they know that the baby, Jesus, was going to be the King of the Jews? Because of the mystery, the unanswered questions, great legends grew up about them. Over the centuries, the wise men were given names. Maybe you've heard them before. Casper, Melchior, Balthazar, pronounced it wrong. They were venerated as saints. If you go look in a cathedral in Cologne, Germany, You'll find relics alleged to be the remains of these three wise men. But the story, the truth, is not the depiction that we have. These wise men are called magi from the east in Scripture. That's all we're told about them. But they were magi from the east. And from magi, the word magi, we extrapolate that they were wise men. And of course, they were educated. They were educated men. But really, the term magi, it's a Persian word. The Persian word refers to a special class of priests in the Persian Empire. And from other sources, we understand that the Magi had existed, this class of priestly people from Persia, for hundreds of years before the time of Christ. So these were not new men. This was not just some one-off event. As a matter of fact, they had their own religion. They were not Christians. They were not Jews. They had their own religion. And most people, historians, think that they were probably close followers of Zoroastrianism, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's one of the minor religions of the world that has a lot to do with the stars in the sky. They had their own priesthood. They had their own writings. And it appears from the book of Daniel that they existed in Daniel's day as well. And it even seems that Daniel may have been appointed head over the caste of the Magi in the time of King Darius' reign in Persia. So who were the Magi? They were, for lack of better description, they were the professors and philosophers of their day. They were brilliant. They were highly educated. They were scholars. They were trained in things like medicine, history, religion, prophecy, and astronomy. They were also trained in what we would call astrology. Now, today we think of astrology, or when we think of astrology, we think of those fortune-telling quotes that appear in the back of the newspaper or on the oddities page. You know, the ones that say, well, hey, if you're a Gemini, do we have any Gemini in here if you know who you are? If you're a Gemini, stay home today because a tree's going to fall somewhere and it'll probably fall on your head. You should just stay home. Call out sick. Or maybe if you're Sagittarius, hey, Sagittarius, be aware this is your season for love. Ooh. But you know, in the beginning, astrology was connected with humanity's search for God. And the ancients studied the skies in order to find the answers to the great questions of life, the same questions we ask today. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What's God's purpose for my life? And there's a difference between astronomy and astrology. Astronomy is the science of the study of the stars. Astrology is the belief that there's a connection between the position of the stars and human destiny. And so the Magi were experts in both. They were experts in astronomy and they were experts in astrology, and they claimed to be able to divine the future according to stars and the position of stars. And that's an important fact for us to know, is that these men were highly influential in Persia. They were very much men of influence. They were in fact advisors to the king. While they're not kings, we could call them king makers because their function was one as political advisors. The Persian rulers would come to them and say, what does this mean? What do you think is going to happen here? And they would advise them what decisions were to be made. And so the question becomes, well, if they're rulers and advisors to a Persian king, if they're advisors to a ruler, a Persian king, why have they traveled so far from home? It was a journey of 1,000 miles from Persia to Israel. Why have they made such a treacherous journey? And the answer is they have come to see the baby born king of the Jews. Where is he? Where is the baby that's born, King of the Jews? This is fascinating. They knew a baby had been born, but they didn't know where. They knew he was king, but they didn't know his name. So they come to Jerusalem, 1,000 miles, the capital city, seeking help. And they also assume that everyone must know about this baby. Everyone must know about what's happening. Everyone must know about this day that is so blessed. But a great surprise awaits them. Because in fact, the reaction of Herod is even more fascinating. Matthew 2 and 3 says that when Herod heard the news, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. And that word there, disturbed, really means to shake violently. Herod was shook up at the news. We do know that Herod was very old. He was very sick. He is in fact a dying man tottering on an unstable throne. And the idea of a baby, and not just any baby, but a baby born King of the Jews, was a direct threat to him. And so he's scared. And he's even more scared because the Magi pose a threat to him as well. These are advisors to a competing king, the king of Persia. We don't know whether there were only 3 or not, but even if there were only 3, I can guarantee you they did not travel alone. They went with a military with them. They had a procession with them. They had people. As a matter of fact, Jerusalem was all stirred up at the fact that these Magi had appeared and come into the city. And so Herod is afraid at the Magi's appearing, and he's afraid at the birth of a baby that is known as to be the King of the Jews. So Herod turns to the scribes and priests for advice. He has only one question: where is this child to be born? The scribes, they don't even have to look it up. They already know the answer. 700 years earlier, the prophet Micah had predicted the Messiah's birth in the town of Bethlehem. And that was common knowledge in Israel. Bethlehem is blessed. Bethlehem will be the seat of the king born. Bethlehem will be the one where the baby Jesus is going to be born. Little children learned that in Sabbath school. Even before they were 6 years old, they learned Bethlehem would be the place. It's hard to believe that Herod didn't know about it, but Herod didn't, or he acted like he didn't. If you add what the scribes knew to what the wise men had figured out, you surely conclude that the signs of Jesus' coming were clear enough for anyone to see. And it's sometimes said that God always speaks loud enough for a willing ear to hear. And God is speaking today. God's speaking right now. It's sometimes certainly true that those who could hear do not hear. And God spoke loud enough here that Herod could have known, but he didn't. The wise men knew. The wise men knew. But it's not just that the wise men knew. The wise men knew, and they did something. The scribes knew, but the scribes did nothing. And when God is speaking, it's not enough to know, it's more important to do. And that's true today. What set the wise men, the Magi, apart was that they knew, but not only did they know, but they did. And I want to be wise. I know you want to be wise. So it's not enough to just know. We must do. Verse 11 tells us that on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. You may ask the question, when the Magi finally found the baby Jesus, were they disappointed? Imagine they traveled 1,000 miles. They'd probably built up in their mind what they would experience, what they would see, what would happen. Were they disappointed? They might have been. After all, after everything they'd been through, the journey, the detour into Jerusalem to find out that it was actually in Bethlehem where they should go, and arriving finally, did what they find seem anticlimactic? It might have seemed that way. He didn't look like a king. His home was definitely not a castle. He had no scepter in his hand. He commanded no armies. He gave no speeches. He passed no laws. No one else was there trying to find him, only them. He could not walk or talk. There was no royal decree coming from his lips. And as a matter of fact, the king in the area wanted to kill him. There's nothing to make you think he's a king. To the outward eye, he was nothing but as a peasant child born into dire poverty. But to those magi, he was a king. He possessed more royalty in a cradle than Herod possessed in his fine palace right down the road. He was greater in his infancy than Louis XIV was in his ascendancy to a throne. He was more powerful as a child than Napoleon as an emperor who ruled most of the known world in his time. But it did not seem that way. The eyes of flesh revealed nothing but a normal baby, gurgling, cooing, moving his tiny hands side to side, reaching eagerly for his mother. Just a baby. Flesh can't tell you what the Spirit of God can. The flesh will lie to you because what you see may in fact not be reality. Because he didn't seem like a king, but the Magi knew, here is a king. Let me paraphrase the words of one Bible commentator. Although we read that the Magi met Herod, we do not read that they worshiped him. But when they found this tiny baby, yet not 2 weeks old, rocking in his mother's arms, these great men fell on their faces before him, and to this baby they gave the honor due a king. And what Herod craved, the baby received. They came bearing gifts. Gifts fit for a king. The last detail, the one for which the Magi are most remembered, they opened up their treasures, presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And the gifts in themselves were expensive. They represent a worthy tribute. But beyond that, there's a very ancient tradition that sees these gifts as symbolic of who this child would become. The early church fathers said that gold represented the wealth and power of a king. Frankincense was used in the temple worship of the Lord, and it represents his deity. He's truly God, born in human flesh. And then there is myrrh, a kind of perfume made from the leaves of the Christus rose, and it was used in beauty treatments. But when mixed with vinegar, it became an anesthetic. And after a person died, myrrh was used to anoint the body and prepare it for burial. John 19:39 tells us that Jesus' body was bound in linen wrappings along with 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes. So the gift of myrrh pictures his suffering and death. Magi knew. Gold pointing to his majesty. He's a king. Frankincense pointing to his deity. He is God. Myrrh pointing to his humanity. He's destined to suffer and die. And we ask, did the Magi understand all of this? Did they know when they were packing up, getting ready, and trying to select gifts to present to a king? Were they aware? No, not at all. But God arranged it so that their gifts to the Holy Child would point us to who he is and why he came. And so I offer these abiding truths from this story for your consideration on this branch's Christmas Sunday. If the wise men can find Jesus, you can too. You can too. Think of how many barriers they had to cross to get to Jesus. There was a cultural barrier. They were Persian. There was a distance barrier. There was 1,000 miles between them and him. There was a language barrier. They didn't speak Hebrew. They came from Persia. There was a racial barrier. There was a religious barrier. They were not searching for Christ. They found the King of the Jews. There was no king there to help them. There was only a hostile king and indifferent religious leaders. But they overcame all of that to find Jesus. So it's not going to be a cultural thing that keeps you from finding Jesus. It won't be a language thing. It won't be racial. It won't be a lack of having a church around to guide you and direct you. It won't be a lack of any. There's no reason, because if you want to find Jesus, just like the Magi, you can find Jesus. He's not hiding himself. You can find him. If they found him, so can you. The second point that I would make is this: if God can use a star to reach pagan astrologers, then he can use anything to reach anyone, anywhere. Sometimes we despair at seeing our friends or our family members who have not yet come to Christ because nothing we say seems to move them or have the effect that we want it to have on them. And this story ought to give us great hope. Our God is infinitely creative. He created the heavens, the earth. He created everything we see and witness. He created it all. And he is infinitely creative. And he is creative in the things he can use to break through into someone's life. So your husband may be far from God, but don't despair, because God can reach him. God can use anything. He can use a star. He can use a book. He can use a tract. He can use a Bible study. He can use a television show. He can use a song. He can use a bow and an arrow. He can use a gun. He can use a chance comment. He can use anything he desires. What I mean by gun is I don't mean he'll be putting it to somebody's head and say, serve me. I mean like if that's a common interest someone has with someone else. Anything that he desires, he can use. And if God can reach 1,000 miles and find men in Persia who had an open spiritual ear, God can reach those wise men. He can reach anybody. He can reach anybody. So don't lose hope in that. Don't lose faith in God's ability. The third thing is this: if the wise men offered Jesus gifts fit for a king, shouldn't we? Shouldn't we? It's good to remember that the tradition of giving gifts at Christmas time and the season we're celebrating, that it did not start with Santa Claus. Santa Claus has nothing to do with Christmas. I mean, he does in a marketing sense, but not in a spiritual sense. And he has very little to do with giving gifts. It started with the wise men. And often we get so caught up in giving and receiving that we forget where it all began. We get caught up in the season and we forget why we're in this season. It's good to give gifts to each other. It's even better to give gifts to Jesus. And it's good to show our love to those that we love. But it's even better to show love to the one who loved us when we were not lovable, because he paid it all. He loved us even before. He paid the price while we were yet sinners. He bought us. His love was for us. And this surely is the central meaning of the story. And this year and every year, we're invited at this time to return to Bethlehem to see the whole story unfold in front of us. A baby lies there who is king and God and sacrifice. And Mary, did you know? Joseph, did you? She did know, by the way, just so you know that. She did know. It's a wonderful song, but she did know. Joseph knew, all of them. But they're witnessing something that is transpiring and unfolding, that is the beauty of all of time, hangs and hinges on this moment. From that point leading up to the cross, everything hinges on that. And here is a baby who is king, who is God, who is a sacrifice. He's the king in the cradle. He's the deity in diapers. And he is a sacrifice resting in his mother's arms. And we're invited to bring our best gift to him. And you know what he would want more than anything else? More than anything else you can give him? Your heart. Your heart. Your heart. Because if he has your heart, he has everything. Today we're going to be committing to an offering, and I'm holding up here in my hands this envelopes. These are envelopes on the floor, different numbers representing what we're committing to give. I hold in my hand 500. That's what's on this one, 500. I better put that down. No, I'm kidding. But even more than this, what he wants is your heart. Because if he has your heart, he has everything else. God does not need your money. God does not need you to give to accomplish his will. It's not about your money. It's about your heart. And when we have given him our heart, every other part of our life aligns with him too. My life is lived for him. When I show up at work on Monday, I'm working for him. Whenever I give my tithe at the end of the week and a check comes from work, I'm giving my tithe to him because I love him. Everything else becomes about him. Why? Because I've given my heart to him. And if you don't hear anything else that I say today, that's what he wants of you. He wants your heart. He's done everything. He was born in a manger. He suffered in life. He struggled, experienced all that we experienced, went to a cross, suffered and died there for your heart. For your heart. To redeem your soul, your heart, and your life. King who would come down. That's what the Bible says. Paul said that he humbled himself, made himself lower. Why? For us. For us. If you'll stand with me. If the wise men can find Jesus, so can you. And if God can use a star to reach pagan astrologers, he can use anything to reach anyone. And if the wise men offered Jesus gifts fit for a king, we should too. We should too. Today is our Christmas for Christ offering, commitment offering. And I want to challenge you with this question. What can you give? The popular refrain in all of the videos and all of the conversation we have around Christmas for Christ is to bring our best gift to Jesus. In other words, if the greatest gift you gave to someone else, why would you not want to give an even better gift to Jesus Christ? Why not? Bruce was telling me about the gift he's given to Akimi. It's a car, a brand new car. It's a beautiful brand new car. Bruce's head shot up like a rocket when I said that. Well, let's suppose that Bruce was given to Akimi a car. Big bow, it's the Lexus December to Remember. She comes outside, and there's the bow. There's the car. He loves his wife. And I have no doubt, and Bruce, if I'm spoiling your gift, I'm very sorry. There's no doubt that he would love to give his wife something that she could cherish, and every time she'd get in and she'd push that start button and it'd fire up on all cylinders. She's driving down the road enjoying it. She would think of her husband, how much he loves me. Oh, that's a beautiful car. When did you get that? Oh, it was Christmas. My husband, couldn't believe it. He loves me so much. I'm using that goofy analogy just to talk about this. Bruce was showing his love for his wife because he can't reach into his chest and hand her his heart. But it was a token of what she meant to him. And if Bruce would do that for Akimi, how much more was his love for God? Say, God, I want to show you just how much I love you. And I'll tell you what matters to Jesus more than anything, because he died for it, are souls. And when we give today, when we commit to give, everyone, whether it's a $500, if you scrounge around up here, I think there might be one that says 1,000. There's one that says, here's one that says $15. Whatever it is, whenever you give that and you say, I'm going to give my best gift to Jesus Christ, every one of those dollars is going for a soul. For a soul. When you give in support of missions, it's going for a soul. Somebody you could never reach far in another place, it's going for a soul. And I don't know of anything else that our church takes part of that is a better indication of our desire to do the will of God and to reach people. And we have things we're doing as a church family. Our church is not perfect. I love our church, don't get me wrong. Our church is not perfect though. But as a church body, our desire is to fulfill the Great Commission and do God's will, to please him and be about what he desires and what hangs on his heart for us. And today when we commit in this offering, what can you give? It is committing a token to the heart of God. So we're going to pray for just a moment, and then after the prayer, I'm going to invite everyone to come up, and you can just survey these envelopes and just look and say, what can I do? What am I committing to? You don't have to give it today. It's not a today offering. It's a January offering. It's after Christmas. So you're thinking, man, Bruce did in fact buy Akimi that Lexus, and he has no more budget left. He's got January when that first payment's due. No, I'm kidding, but you understand what I'm saying. It's not a today thing. I'm committing to give this because I want to give the best gift.